Welcome to the Queen Trail Podcast.
Meditation doesn't have to be sitting still and having an empty mind.
The journey is such a beautiful thing because we are all on a journey.
You want to make sure you have some kind of distribution plan, or at least have an idea of it, because you can make this really amazing film and it only gets seen by your family and friends.
Old Hollywood is still intact.
Every horse runs hard, but when they win, and they know it, they've got this little sass about them.
It was pretty rough. I had to go into the water and with my med pack, swim to the beach, treat these guys, put them on my back, swim out to the helo.
And I'm like, oh my God, I've never seen those before. And I said, what are those? And before I could even finish the sentence, she said, oh my God, you didn't touch them, did you?
Even if monarchs go away and we never see one again, because there never will be monarchs again if they die out, it is just a little indicator of larger threats. Yeah.
My dad said, so what were you guys doing in the desert? And I said, we were taking nude photos.
Hey everybody, I hope you had a great week since the last time that we got together. We just celebrated Mother's Day, so I want to send a huge belated shout out to incredible moms. And it was really funny because last week I had all of these people, I mean, it was just like such a surprise, like on Wednesday, run up to me and earnestly wish me a happy Mother's Day. And for a second, I was so confused. And to be honest, I'd had this moment of dread, like, oh crap, I forgot Mother's Day. Like, my calendar is totally off track. It dawned on me after a moment that it was Mother's Day in Mexico on Wednesday. So belated, gracias y felicidades para todas las madres. You know, I'm really lucky that my mom is still with me. I got to visit her yesterday. So I just want to take a moment to recognize her, especially because she's got, of course, a very special place in my life. And she's always been just a really adventurous person. And I think that the fact that she left Costa Rica about a month before I was born really emphasizes that. And, you know, it's hard to encapsulate a mom in a few short words, right? So I'm going to pick one moment from my life that kind of encapsulates her many talents and her personality in a nutshell. And that is a trip that we took. It was a camping trip. So pretty much the whole time that I was growing up, we were camping every single moment that we could. We were on these crazy adventures all the time, and it was all driven, right? So we never flew to, like, we'd leave California and we'd drive to Wyoming, and we'd stop at places along the way, but most of the time it was destination oriented. So as I've grown up, I meander, like I have a destination, but I'm also like, what else is there along the way, right? And so it's going to take me 10 days to get there because I want to stop at all the cool places along the way. We didn't do that. We would usually just drive straight through. And if it was really far away, we'd stop maybe like at a KOA campground or something like that, which at the time I was 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, somewhere around there, you know, on these various trips. And at those ages, you don't really want to stay at a KOA campground. So and actually, to be honest, I wouldn't want to stay at one now. I don't really like camping despite all of the camping that I did growing up. So, you know, when we would pull into these places, it would be really late at night because my dad was just a road beast. I mean, he would take off from the house and drive. And, you know, every once in a while, my mom would switch off with him, but mostly it was him driving. And the way that my mom set up the car is that she would put a cooler in the middle of the back seat. We had a Chevy Nova, so it wasn't the most comfortable vehicle to be driving from state to state in. But what she would do is she would put that cooler in between the seat. And I think part of that was to keep my sister and I separated. We're 2.5 years apart. And, you know, I have some great memories growing up, but really long road trips have a way of making people in the car cranky. And especially when you're a young kid and you're really fidgety, like you can only play Uno and Old Maid and Go Fish and whatever it was that we were playing for so long and eat so many snacks from the cooler before you got just really antsy and started picking on each other. So there's a lot of those memories. We had some stupid game that was Bang Boom Out of Town. And so when you saw a license plate that was from another state, you would punch each other. And so we would try to spot those license plates first. My parents put a stop to that really quickly. But I do remember that that was one of the things. And then, then you're just like hitting each other for whatever reason. So we would pull into these campgrounds in between places like the Grand Tetons or Laysan Volcanic National Park or the Grand Canyon. I mean, like we went to some really super cool places. But they were really far away, so we had to drive, and there would be the stops in between, and we'd pull in. And I just remember this one time, I don't even know if it was a KOA campground or if it was just like off the side of the road or where the heck we were. But it was Nevada, and we had been driving through miles and miles of desert road with just like saguaro cactuses or whatever other type of plants were out there in the desert. And the Milky Way was above us in all of its glory. It was just so spectacular. There were no lights anywhere where we were driving through. And we finally pulled off and set up this tent. And I remember we got it all set up. And then just before I went to bed, I thought, I'm not sleeping in here. I'm going to take my sleeping bag and pull it outside. And I had this like little romantic idea in my mind of, like the desert traveler that rolls out their bedroll and sleeps underneath the stars next to the campfire. And I'm telling you, if I had a guitar, I would have been out there plinking on those strings. But I do remember that it was just like such a glorious, beautiful night until I actually fell asleep. And I just wanted to look at those stars. And it was really beautiful on this little camping spot off the side of the road. So anyway, back to this time that I think kind of encapsulates my mom and her talents. We drove to a camping spot, and it wasn't that long of a drive. We actually left after school, I believe, and it was probably like Memorial Day weekend or something like that. So it was a nice long weekend. My dad was really into radio-controlled airplanes, and he picked this specific campground so that he could fly his latest model. He would handcraft these. So he cut out like all of the little pieces of balsa wood. I remember going to the hobby store with him to pick out the right pieces of balsa wood, pick out those propellers. He had the X-Acto knives. He had like little grinding machines in the garage. I mean, the whole shebang. It was great. And we got there, and my sister and I had been coloring in the car. This was kind of a disaster in every way that you can imagine. It was a really hot weekend, and we left those crayons on the back console of the car. And it was like brand new 64 crayon box of Crayolas. We ran out of the car. My parents told us, go and play. And they were the kind of parents who, like, if we were in Yellowstone or Yosemite or wherever the heck it was that we went to, they'd be like, go out and play in the woods and be back by a certain time. And my sister and I were really curious, intrepid kids, but we were like really good kids. So we always came back. We weren't the kids who would be stealing alcohol or cigarettes or anything like that. In fact, when my mom first married my dad, he was a smoker, and we would be hanging our heads out the window because he'd smoke in the car, he'd smoke in the airplane, and it was the worst thing ever. Like, we hated it. So I'm a little grateful for that because I never smoked. We just go out there and we'd find pine cones and cool rocks and pick up lizards. We knew which snakes were not the ones that you could pick up and which ones were. So we picked those up. I mean, we were tough little kids. And so this time, they did the same thing. And my dad said, well, I'll put the tent up. Your mom's going to cook. You guys go out and have fun. And we were having a great time. And we were like splashing in a stream or something like that, skipping rocks, whatever it was that we were doing. And my mom eventually came out to find us. And she said, I have a surprise for you. And we're like, ooh, cool. So we followed her back to the camp. And the surprise was that all of our clothes got left behind, and we only had the clothes that was on our backs. And my sister, her name's Tanya and I were not happy about this. Again, young kids will express whatever they're feeling. And it was like, I have to wear the same clothes all weekend long. Oh, this is such a calamity. The one thing that my mom had brought, and it's really kind of funny because she was really into bandanas at the time, was like a case full of bandanas. I don't know, she had like 10 of them or something. And she also had a bunch of dish towels. So she was the most amazing seamstress. She was this person who could see what the fashions were on TV, like, what Raquel Welch was wearing, whatever the stars of the time period were wearing, and she could duplicate very similar clothing on her little sewing machine, and it was just magic. And, so she grabbed these bandanas and she grabbed the dish towels and she fashioned little shorts out of the dish towels for us. And she fashioned these really cute little tank tops out of the bandanas. So we were clothed all weekend long, and she made the most amazing food. And it didn't matter with my mom whether she was cooking on a stove or she was cooking over a fire pit. It was always super great. So I did mention that this was a disastrous weekend. The spot that my dad picked, because it was really close to the area where he wanted to fly his plane, there weren't like a ton of trees, and it was actually not a very pretty campsite. It was pretty close to this secluded parking lot where most people didn't even know it existed. And the lake was nearby, but still it was asphalt. And we did have a spot under some trees nearby, but we also were right next to this yellow jacket nest. So my mom's cooking dinner, and all of a sudden we're getting just harassed by these damn yellow jackets. And my dad was explaining that, like, don't swat these things, because not only do they bite, but they can literally bite you just to get a better grip of your skin so they can sink that stinger in. I mean, they're really aggressive. They were fighting us for our food. They're like so intrepid. You're holding a burger, and if you've ever been anywhere where yellow jackets are, you know what I'm saying. And so, I dropped my burger. I went running off into the woods screaming. And eventually we moved our campground because we realized that we can't live next to this yellow jacket nest. We didn't do it that night because everybody was just tired, and the tent was already set up, and it was like, we'll move in the morning. In the morning, we got out to the car, and the heat of the sun had melted the box of 64 crayons, and it was this beautiful silver wax river with rainbow colors going through it from one side to the other of my mom's rear console. We let it melt again, cleaned that up. My mom wasn't super thrilled because that was her car. I think it took a few hot days of wax being released and wiped up, probably the rest of the summer, before it all disappeared again. But she was amazing. She dressed us. She made sure that we had food in our stomachs. She made sure that we moved to a safer spot. And she's just always been that kind of supportive rock for us, making sure that we're always protected and safe. And so, happy Mother's Day, Mom. Speaking of adventures, this next episode of In the Company of Friends Talks is with my dear friend, Dunne Atwood, who is just a lifelong adventurer, intrepid, On March 7th, he took off from the Sea of Cortez, where he and his sailing partner, their sailboat is called First Light, were set up as a final staging area for the last bit of preparation to take off on a sail across the Pacific. Between March 7th and March 19th, they headed further south, and then on March 19th, they took off for French Polynesia. They reached landfall on April 11th. As they approached the port of Hiva Oa. One of the cool places that you'll hear him talk about that he actually got to visit and had been a lifelong dream of his was Fatu Hiva. It took them 21 days of sailing to make it there, and they hung out for a while. I think they are back on that great conveyor belt, ocean blue road, so to speak, of the Pacific, heading to their next destination. So please grab a cuppa and enjoy this amazing talk with my friend, Don Atwood.
It's kind of neat. It's a neat little rig. And I bought all this stuff for making guitar and ukulele recordings. But how's it sound now?
It sounds perfect.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is really good.
I've got to actually take one of the headphones off. I find that if I don't do that, I can't hear my own voice, and it seems really strange.
This is so great. So are you making a lot of recordings?
I haven't done much of anything. In fact, I've been so obsessed with boat things lately that I haven't even touched my guitar in about a week and a half, which is a real shame and very unusual.
That is probably such a source of stress reduction, right?
Normally is, yeah, absolutely. But when you've got lots of stress coming from every other aspect of your life, and I've sort of gone beyond the point of just kind of noodling and strumming songs that I know. I'm actually trying to get good at it, which puts a little bit of pressure on it. I could be a perfectionist, and I'm striving hard to up my skill level, and so it's not trivial. It's like, this is work. I've got to make a commitment to this. Be a grumpy old man singing that song. We'll see how it goes.
I can't imagine you being a grumpy old man. You're so adventurous, and I know that you're getting ready right now to go on a huge adventure.
It is, yeah. First I've got to get down to sort of the staging point. I'm with Julie here, my sailing companion, my partner, and we're up in a really beautiful town that I'd never been to before. It's San Carlos, on the mainland coast up in the Sea of Cortez, and absolutely gorgeous. I'm surrounded by some of the most beautiful topography. It's this gorgeous natural harbor with a really fine marina. Kind of a discovery. I'm having explored this area for quite some time. I've never bothered to go over to the mainland coast. But from here, with favorable winds, we'll sail down to Puerto Vallarta, and that will be the staging point for heading off to the Marquesas.
That's so exciting. You sent me a picture, and I just now when you said you've never actually been to this section of the Sea of Cortez, I was really surprised because I know that you go there a lot. And also, I just wanted to put out the invitation if Julie wants to join in the conversation, she's welcome to.
Actually, she's off doing laundry right now, which is perfectly fine. So there's always chores to be done on the boat.
Yeah.
But, the next, you mentioned this big adventure, and actually the very first step of it is rather daunting. From Puerto Vallarta to the very first island in the island group of the Marquesas, French Polynesia, is 2,750 miles. So if you think about it, it would be equivalent to driving across continental United States at about 6 miles an hour.
Oh my gosh.
It's a long, slow trudge. It will take something on the order of probably three to 4 weeks to complete, depending upon whether we get stalled out in the doldrums or something. But it's going to be interesting. 24/7, you're dealing with squalls that might be coming your way. You're dealing with large swells. You're enjoying the beauty of nature and the seabirds that are flying overhead. It's going to be quite the adventure. And the destination itself, the Marquesas, are something that I've probably dreamt about I was thinking about it last night, probably 30 to 40 years. At some point, I'd read Herman Melville's Teepee, which is a description of the Marquesas. And I've seen photos of this spectacular landfall, this island. It's Fatu Hiva down in the south. And there's this anchorage that is just stunning. It's got these magnificent karst formations rising up. And for obvious reasons, if you see a photograph of it, it's always been called the Bay of Penises by the local inhabitants. But I think the missionaries must have played their role, because at some point, very ironically, they changed it from Bay of Penises to Bay of Virgins.
Oh my gosh, is that funny?
These tall spires still tower up from the harbor, but it is now a location of virgins.
I am looking at a picture of it. That was actually a very appropriate name for it. It does look like a bunch of penises. And, it's so funny because I have this collection of photographs of nature looking like human anatomy. And there are so many penises and butts. And I actually inadvertently took a picture of the kids above this rock formation, and right below them, it looks like this rock is giving birth to them because it looks like a vagina. And I thought, well, I cannot put this picture up anywhere. It's just, it was shocking when I saw it, how much it looks like it. But there's a lot in nature that looks like that. You go into some of these caves, like it's the one that's in New Mexico, the big giant underground cave with the stalactites.
Carlsbad, yeah.
Yes, that one. And a lot of those rock formations look like human anatomy. So I could see that, but I could also see how when the religious conquistadores came through, they would change the name.
But the thing you can always do, Sil, you can go ahead and post it. And if anybody says anything snide, you just snap back immediately. Get your mind out of the gutter. What are you thinking?
I don't think with that particular picture, I'll find it and I'll send it to you, because there's no way to take your mind out of the gutter with that picture. It's just very much nature imitating humanity. And I think that it's great, So this is Fatu Hiva, you said.
That's right. And officially, one should not be going there first, but it's the one that's closest, and it's the one to windward. So if you miss the opportunity to see it right off the bat, you're probably not ever going to make it against the trade winds to get back there. So albeit not our official first stop, First Light may in fact drop anchor in that little harbor for a photo opportunity and appreciate the beauty for a day or two before we head off where we can truly enter the Marquesas for the first time.
Mm-hmm. So I feel like I'm jumping ahead, because this is 2,500 miles out of when you first take off, right?
That's actually a little bit more than that. But yeah, it's a full 3+ weeks to get there, right?
Wow. Are there hiking trails, or do you have plans once you get there of what you're going to be doing?
French Polynesia has these 3 clusters or groupings of islands, and the Marquesas, the easternmost ones, are these just spectacularly tall, verdant mountains full of waterfalls and valleys and ponds to swim in. So yeah, absolutely, it's our hope while we're there in the Marquesas to hike up into probably sweltering mountains. I don't know what to expect temperature-wise, but going up into the jungle, bathing beneath waterfalls, and just exploring the area. And also, it's rich in culture. There's ruins that date back hundreds or 1,000 years, and a remarkable culture that stood there and developed for as long. So it'll be interesting in lots of different ways.
This is really incredible. I'm just looking at pictures of it that I just pulled up here online, and it looks so beautiful. So it's going to be 3 weeks to get there. What are, I kind of feel like I'm going to be jumping around a little bit because I've got so many questions, but what are the plans? How do you get started on such a journey? What are the expectations for 3 weeks? What are you going to be doing for 3 weeks in the middle of the ocean?
Well, I said I need to practice my guitar more, so certainly that will be one aspect of it. I've got lots of Kindle books awaiting me. And when you have just like 2 people on board a boat, you do a watch schedule where typically what we do is 3 hours on, 3 hours off. So your sleep pattern's very much broken up. You get up, you're on watch, you're responsible for making sure there's no ships that are going to hit you, that there's no islands that you're going to run aground on. And then you get a chance to go to sleep. And if you're able to get to sleep quickly, which I'm blessed that way, fortunately, I climb into a plane, and before we're even off the ground, I'm snoozing. So years of air travel led to that, and it works to my advantage here on board the boat. but it'll be up appreciating nature. It might be from 12 o'clock midnight to 3 o'clock in the morning, and it'll just be first light sailing along. I'm alone there in the cockpit, maybe listening to some music or plinking away on my guitar, looking up at the constellations. And at some point, I'm really looking forward to this, is I'm used to seeing the North Star, particularly when I was up in Alaska, but it's going to be intriguing to be down south of the equator and be able to look up and see the Southern Cross overhead in, beautiful starry night. So very much looking forward to that.
Oh, that's going to be incredible. And I know you're also a photographer. So are you taking equipment that's going to be able to capture that beauty?
I hope so. We've all kind of lapsed towards using our phones for taking pictures, and I do plenty of that. But I've got a very nice underwater camera that we'll be using extensively once we get to clear waters. And I'm taking along my real nice Canon SLR. So when I get to Fatu Hiva in that Bay of Virgins, I'll be able to snap some hopefully lovely photographs. So looking forward to it.
That's going to be beautiful.
We're asking about the prep work on it, and it is a big deal. I mean, people, well, you have to invest a lot of effort. I've been living on my boat about 6 months out of each year over the course of the last 6 years, and I've installed most of the systems: water maker, self-steering, a wind turbine to produce energy, solar panels. So when you've sort of put things basically into the boat, you know them really well. So I feel like I've got a command of things. But I had some recent doubts. There was a question that arose about the engine. I was sailing along, and I was checking the bilge, and I found that water was flowing into the boat, which is a little bit troublesome if you're going thousands of miles across an ocean. So
Right.
it turned out it was siphon action for a little tube that was coming off a seal for the propeller shaft. It was one of those things you could overlook, but needless to say, of some consequence.
Yeah.
But you resolve those issues, and you feel like the boat's as solid as it's going to be. You provision it with food that will last you. I think Julie and I could probably live on the food that's currently on board the boat, much of which came from Trader Joe's. We've got lots of peanuts and cashews and walnuts and things stashed away below the floorboards and various cabinets and cupboards. But,
I'm a huge fan of Trader Joe's.
Oh my, absolutely. Yes, it has sustained me in many of my travels, but Stag's chili is always a good standby, black beans, lots of rice, and hopefully we're catching fish. I've been fairly successful in the past in tossing a line or sometimes two off the stern of the boat as we're sailing along and pulling up a beautiful mahi-mahi or something that will sustain you for 3-4 days of great, just lovely meals.
Yeah. What are you doing for like fresh fruits and vegetables and that sort of thing?
That's one of the situations where certain things last a long time. Cabbage, for instance, is a great purchase because you can make salads for many, many weeks and it doesn't go bad quickly. Your bananas and whatnot are apt to go by pretty fast. So when we leave, we're going to be stocking up with all the freshies we can do. And since Mexico is just awash in delicious avocados, I think we'll probably be eating guacamole nightly until they all turn brown and they're gone. But you consume freshies up front, and there's going to be a spell in which it's just going to be black beans and rice and things like that. And then once we get to the Marquesas, it's verdant, but it also is just rich with all kinds of interesting fresh fruits. Bananas are just there for the picking as you go up trails. If you're down in the village areas, you've got to be a little bit watchful because they do view the profusion of growth, the wealth of the land, as part of kind of their cultural history and their rights. So you respectfully ask the natives if you can take something, or you might engage in some sort of trade, offer them something that would be useful that they can't get easily locally. But I expect to get bananas, and there's breadfruit there. There's all kinds of interesting things. And so once again, we'll be stocking up. And then a little bit farther along as we get from the Marquesas, from these high volcanic, gorgeous looking islands, we'll then go to the Tuamotus, which are just low-lying atolls with nary a bit of land. It's just kind of a ring of coral with safe anchorage within, gin clear water, lots of fish, gorgeous coral reefs to swim on and spearfish. And then from there you go on to the Society Islands, Tahiti, Bora Bora, etc. And those will have large marketplaces where we can buy virtually anything. Although, from what I understand, it's horribly expensive in French Polynesia. The things that you can get easily would be brie cheese, which is fine, and wonderful French bread that I think are subsidized by the French who still basically run the islands.
Okay. The natives seeing their food, the bounty of their lands as part of their culture and having these particular customs that you have to follow. It just sounds so early explorer like and something that most people would not be familiar with. And also just gives you an idea as a traveler that other places do have these cultural requirements in place that we have to follow. So did you do a lot of studying up, a lot of research on what the expectations would be once you got there?
I know a lot about it historically. I'm a big fan of, reading nautical literature, and Captain James Cook has been my hero for most of my life, probably. So I've read the narrative accounts of his travels through the Society Islands and up to Hawaii and whatnot. And the cultures have been very interesting. I mean, certain island groups have a rather bad history with regards to violence towards the sailors and vice versa. The folks in French Polynesia seem largely to be incredibly unmaterialistic. Although there was problems would arise. There was a lot of thievery when the Tahitians would come aboard the king's vessels, and they were coveting anything made out of iron, nails, virtually anything that could be extracted from the planks of the boat would be.
Oh my gosh.
or perhaps traded by the sailors for favors or items available on the islands. But as communities, it's been, I think, very much a communal society where things are frequently shared. So has that changed? I'm sure it has. I probably know a great deal more about what things were like in the late 1700s than I do now. But very much looking forward to it. And as one of the great joys of travel is experiencing virtually different outlooks on life and life values. So really looking forward to that.
Yeah, I think that's going to be really exciting. And also all of the different food that, like you said, is plentiful there that is so vastly different from anything that would be available here. When I was in Hawaii, I had the opportunity to eat breadfruit, but I actually never tried it. So that's one thing I think a lot of people have not tried, but there's probably all kinds of other produce that is going to be available. And then really probably even different fish, I'm assuming.
Probably, yeah, maybe the same families, but yeah, different fish, probably different flavors, a different availability of fish. One thing that's interesting is we leave from French Polynesia and move on to Tonga and Fiji. We'll be increasingly encountering where kava root is available, and that's used to create this potent drink that has kind of I think a semi-narcotic effect upon you. Your tongue turns numb. I think you get a little bit of a rush to the head. And when you visit these outlying villages, the tradition is you as the traveler, you as the visitor, you arrive with kava root that you've perhaps purchased in the marketplace. And it's very interesting. It seems like something from another era, another world entirely. But in order to have permission to anchor within their waters and to walk their islands and sort of participate in the society, you would bring a gift of kava root to the king or the leader of that local island. And it leads to quite a tradition. And they grind up the kava root, turn it into this drink that's shared by you and the members of the society. And with that, basically, you're sharing something with them, and they in turn share their hospitality and the beauty of their island with you in return. So that kind of quaint tradition is lovely, perhaps something we could use a little bit more of in our own modern societies, but I look forward to that kind of thing. I think that's going to be exciting and a lot of fun.
Yeah, memorable for sure. Are you going to be doing a lot of spearfishing?
I sure hope so. I've been very successful in the Caribbean. It's interesting. I've been a hunter before in the past. I lived in Alaska for 10 years, and I would go out moose hunting for a number of years. I had my tags. I was allowed to go out and do it. And I'd take out my 30-06 with a buddy and hunt. And I have to tell you, I was never terribly dissatisfied if I wasn't successful. And I never was, as a matter of fact. But I feel bad killing anything. I've always sort of admired the Indian tradition where they'll take down some animal. And there's almost like a thoughtful prayer that's given for the life of that animal that's basically yielding its life for your sustenance. And fish are a different breed. We don't relate to them nearly as well, but I still very much have that feeling. And I've killed a large number of grouper and snapper in the Caribbean and here in the Sea of Cortez. And I'll continue doing so. There's no better, fresher protein. There's no bycatch. It's not like a net where you wind up catching a dolphin or something. What you aim for is hopefully what you get. And you can be very selective and only cull those things that are sustainable. So I feel good about that. But even with the fish life, it troubles me slightly. I have my hesitation, and I try to be a little bit more respectful and certainly only kill what I need to in order to keep fresh protein on board the boat.
Yeah. And I think that we would really do so much better to think like that, even in food that we purchase at restaurants, choose off the menu, or even at the store. I have stopped eating, for the most part, any kind of shellfish. And part of it is shrimp. The oceans are dragged in order to collect the number of shrimp that we see in the stores and markets and restaurants. And that damages coral reefs. It damages so much of the ecosystem. And I just don't want to be a willing participant in that kind of damage, secondary participant there by purchasing it. So I think it's really important to think of what our contribution is as, part of the food chain that eats other parts of the food chain. How do we do this in a most ecologically friendly way? And of course, without having a huge amount of guilt over it either.
Right. That'll become increasingly important, certainly, but it is now. But with regards to my hopes for the future, I will be eating a lot of fish. I've had various spear guns on board the boat. I now have this absolutely wonderful 115 centimeter long, very lethal spear gun with which I hope to be quite successful in my underwater endeavors. But I can dive fairly deeply, and I will hopefully be able to get some really nice fish. One thing that will be interesting, though, and maybe a little bit troublesome, is that I've been in a lot of waters where the shark populations have been completely depleted. You just don't see them here in the Sea of Cortez. And as far as away as we are from China, nevertheless, there's still the habit of catching sharks, finning them, frequently tossing their bodies overboard, and shipping the shark fins to the Orient. So it's not a problem here in the Sea of Cortez for the most part. I've never seen a shark personally. I'd actually love to. But once you get to the South Pacific, it's a different story. Black tips, white tips, they're pervasive. They're on all the coral reefs. I'll be seeing them regularly. So when you go down, you spear a fish, and it sets out its vibrations and it bleeds into the water, you can expect very, very shortly to have visitations from some of the local denizens of the reef there. And so it'll behoove me to carefully and quickly get out of the water and get my kill in a place where it's safe and the sharks don't need to come around and explore or attempt to take away my catch.
Yeah, there's so much to think about. Are those sharks any more or less lethal than the ones that you would encounter around here? And we get a lot of great whites that have a really bad reputation, but then if you take a look at some of the reputable information from marine organizations, they really make them seem a lot less dangerous than the common stories are. But what about the sharks in the South Pacific? I'm just thinking of some of the stories that I've read about, and again, you mentioned Herman Melville has some really horrific stories about shark attacks or, ships going down and the sharks circling them. Do you have any idea what their personalities are like?
There's tiger sharks, there's bullshit. These are the ones that kind of have the bad rep. And clearly the great white sharks, which I'm from Southern California, and my brother is a surfer there. So yeah, they had quite a few of the great whites, mostly juvenile ones, swimming there and right between the surfers who might be completely unaware of the fact there's this great white, maybe 20 feet away from them. It's probably better that they don't know. But
exactly.
when I'm there, but when I'm spearfishing on the reefs, I think largely they're going to be ones that are considered a little bit more innocuous. They might be inquisitive, but hopefully not too terribly aggressive. And if it boils down to it, a shark really wants a fish on the end of my spear, I will happily yield that for the sake of my own safety. So
Yeah.
We'll see how it goes. And if we get a chance to talk or you interview me a year from now, I'll be able to probably tell you some stories about sharks.
Oh, I would love that. I would love that. And there are a lot of other fish that you have to worry about too. It's not just the sharks, right? I mean, there's other aggressive fish and eels and jellyfish. Are there a lot of jellyfish over there?
There certainly are. Maybe not in these first locations, but you go to a place like Palau and it's famed for just having millions of them filling these bays. So that'll be interesting in its own right. I've had some experiences with moray eels. I do a lot of diving. For me, really the greatest joy of sailing is getting to interesting locations with my home where I can spend as much time as possible underwater. But in the Caribbean, I had some experiences with morays, which I love. They're so graceful underwater with their snake-like movements. But sometimes, and you don't know if it's true aggression or curiosity. You're hearing my ship's clock there.
Oh,
Dinging out the time. But
I thought somebody was ringing your doorbell.
but I've had morays just kind of come at me, and you sort of swat at them, try to chase them away, but they very seemingly aggressively will swim right towards you. And considering they do have sharp teeth and they're alien in their appearance, you try to kind of keep at least an arm's length away from them. So we'll see. Whole new adventure, probably a whole spate of new animals that I've never seen before, but I look forward to experiencing for the first time. It's going to be really quite the adventure. The other thing is, I don't think I have ever seen the clarity of water that I'll be seeing once I get to the Tuamotus or Fiji or Tonga. I've seen videos of just gin clear water and beautiful coral reefs with, every color imaginable. So it's going to be very exciting. I'm really looking forward to it. Feel the boat's ready to go. We're all post-COVID and looking for new adventures and want to get out there. And so the time's right. The only trouble is COVID has created this backlog. A lot of folks who had planned on going to French Polynesia, say 2-3 years ago, myself included, basically got held off. It was kind of interesting. So I came back to the Pacific Ocean in 2020 through the Panama Canal. We worked our way up from Panama, Costa Rica, got up to Mexico. And there was a number of boats leaving that spring to French Polynesia, and they actually got called back. They sailed out 500,000 miles, and through single sideband radio, they were notified that basically the French Polynesia was shutting its doors to new arrivals, which is kind of ironic because if they're worried about COVID, here's folks who have spent 3 weeks in the ocean. There's not a better quarantine that you could ask for. So anybody who arrived on the islands in a healthy condition absolutely did not have COVID, but they weren't allowing that. So these poor folks who had, invested time, effort, preparations, and found themselves on their way for their great adventure wound up actually getting turned around and forced to sail back somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. But I can imagine how disappointing that would be. 1,000 miles out, and then you're told, sorry. I know that that's just the way that the world is, since COVID, but that would be just so frustratingly disappointing.
Well, I think some of those folks probably have cooled their heels, like myself, and now this year they're venturing forth. So it probably won't be some of the anchorages I'll be encountering won't be nearly as quiet as they might be in other years. I think this backlog, this surplus of sailors, will probably be sailing forth this year and filling some of the harbors. So maybe a little busier than usual, but still looking forward to it.
Maybe it was last year, there was a group of musicians who came out to the Warner Grand, which is a really beautiful Art Deco theater in downtown San Pedro. And they were promoting the protection, clearly, of the ocean and the environment, saying that probably within the next 20 years or so, I believe, I don't know if that's the right number of years or not, but it wasn't very many. It would be within our lifetime. Mm-hmm. Many of those small islands are going to be covered in water because of the rising seas and the melting ice caps. And so it's been one of those places on my bucket list to go and see before that happens. I'm really sad that, that is the projection for those islands, but I'd be really interested in hearing once you're done with your amazing adventure, what it's like there and what they're doing to avoid that kind of catastrophe. And if it looks like that's actually the projection.
Yeah, I've heard some of the same stories and read those articles and things with great interest. I think Niue is one of those islands. There's certain nations, island nations basically, that are recognizing that they're going to go away. And there's serious consideration and thought and preparation right now for moving their entire populations and trying to find some other destination where their whole island people can move to, because they're sadly will just be swept beneath the ocean swells and go away entirely. With respect to your comment about getting out there while you can, I guess in a sense that's what we're doing. There is a certain sadness, though, when you feel like you're sort of on the farewell tour for coral reefs in the Great Barrier Reef or something like that, where it's the sad recognition that we might be part of that last generation. And shame on us for passing on to those who follow a planet that doesn't have nearly the beauty, the charismatic animals, just the natural wealth that we had when we were children first growing up. So it's a strange feeling. You want to do it, you want to experience it, but without doubt, I anticipate a certain amount of sadness with regards to the fact that it'll be the recognition that I will be perhaps the last generation to see some of these spectacular sights.
Yeah, the richness and, like you said, the diversity of the animals. There's a whole set of species that will perhaps never be seen again with the demise of these islands, and cultures that are going to be irreparably changed. And hopefully, in the meantime, anybody who's listening can take a look and see what actionable steps can be taken to help the environment and kind of prevent this inevitable train wreck that we seem to be on. But I don't want to be a downer about it. So I do want to hear, in terms of preparing for all of this, charting your course and the amount of time that you're going to be there, because you just mentioned a year from now. Is it going to take a full year for you to do this whole journey that you're about to embark on?
It's kind of, at this point still, it's open-ended. We're just not sure. Think the Pacific Ocean, just think you're basically hopping onto a conveyor belt and being swept westward. You rely upon the trades to get there, and it's downwind sailing. The wind's pushing you along to the west. So you start in the Eastern Pacific, you hit the French Polynesia, Tonga, Fiji, and then it's interesting, though, because there's so many islands in Oceania. There's a wonderful image that I've seen on Facebook a number of times, and I probably posted it myself. There's certain satellite views of Earth where you look down and literally all you see is the Pacific Ocean. It's such an incredibly vast ocean. And so there's island groups. As you're sailing along, there'll be some island nation to the north of you, say the Marshall Islands or something to the south. And you're having to make decisions. And once you've made that decision, basically you've chosen your path. And you can't simply say, well, I'd really like to see that other island group to the north, because the winds won't permit you to get back to them. You're just inexorably being swept westward. So our original thought was actually to sail to French Polynesia, and the French, you're only allowed 90 days within all the islands there. And basically they kick you out. It's the end of your visa. And our thought was to leave the boat there, go back to French Polynesia next year. But the sad part was there's the sailing season that lasts comfortably until November before the cyclones start to come in. And we decided, why be inhibited by French Polynesians' policy? We're just going to carry on, enjoy the season, and continue moving westward. And our plan right now is we actually already have made reservations to keep the boat in Fiji. And that won't happen until the end of October. So what was to be a plan of maybe 90 days has devolved into something where we're going to be out sailing for probably a full 8 months or so. And I won't be back to my home in Colorado till sometime in November.
Oh my gosh. Right in the middle of snow season.
I've missed absolutely glorious, the summer and the fall months. So much for pickleball and hikes and spending time with my newfound friends in my newfound state of Colorado. I just started to feel that I was a member. I established a nice community of friends there. And so parting was a little bittersweet because I knew I was going away for a very long time and actually won't be returning to Colorado till the snow's fallen and the temperatures have dropped and I'll be in the throes of winter yet again. So my timing is absolutely dismal, but I've got the health, I've got the opportunity, I've got a magnificent sailboat, and I'm just going to take advantage of this. So we'll get to Fiji, and after that, come next season, we'll just continue in exploring. And at some point, you get to the end of the Pacific, whether it be Indonesia or South China Sea. I don't quite know at this point. And decisions have to be made. What do you do with your boat? Do you sell it in maybe some not terribly advantageous location? Do you stick it on one of these big boat carriers? They're expensive, but they could perhaps ship my vessel all the way to the Mediterranean, or maybe do the very long journey, cold, rather desolate, from the area of Japan to the Northeast up to Alaska, and then back down the west coast of the U.S., Canada, and the United States. So all bets are off. I'm leaving open the possibility of sailing for the next 5 years. Stay healthy, keep the boat afloat. And as long as I'm enjoying it, it's one of those things that why not participate in?
Why not? I love that. I love your adventurous spirit to just check everything out in the world that you possibly can. I think that's really important to do things like that.
I retired fairly early. I retired at age 61. And I did so because my father had died actually at age 60. And I just felt like life is short and the years that I have are a gift. And the prospect of sailing has been something that I've held near and dear for most of my life. And I've read hundreds or thousands of books, nautical books, about people's experiences, their disasters, all aspects of it. So it seemed like this was the chance, the gift that I was given. And I have a beautiful, incredibly seaworthy vessel. And like I say, with health being there, might as well take advantage of it and get out. So this is the time. I'll do it until it's no longer fun. And then I've got a beautiful home and good friends to return to back in Colorado.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any concerns, especially during the 2,500 plus mile or the 3,000 plus miles that you're going to be embarking on that are only ocean? Do you have any concerns about the weather? Or I've never sailed. So as you're getting pushed along westward bound on this conveyor belt of water, are you always, if you plan it right, ahead of bad weather then?
You can't, nature being what it is, you can't deal with complete certainty. You go with the best available information. So by waiting till when I am to depart, which will be probably mid-March, mid part of this month to early April, we're selecting times that tend to avoid the big storms, the cyclones that ravage, the southern waters later on, starting in November. But you never know. There's undoubtedly we'll encounter squalls along the way. And typically they seem to arise at nighttime. So all of a sudden we might be racing up on deck, shortening sail, and preparing for these massive gusts of winds that can kind of knock your boat about and a deluge of water raining down on you. It's going to be interesting. Mm-hmm. We've got all the appropriate safety devices on board. I've got beacons that will communicate with satellites and tell them where we are. I've got a life raft. If the boat were actually going down, we'd have a place to survive afterwards and hopefully await rescue. So you hope for the best. You plan with available information, but there's no certainty. The other thing is when you get out like into the Tuamotus and whatnot, you're talking about low-lying, really difficult to see islands or atolls that are going to be virtually invisible at nighttime. And you'd better darn well have some pretty good navigation and be carefully navigating those waters. And even once you get to them, you don't dare go in a lot of these atolls unless the sun is behind your shoulder and fairly high up in the sky to enable you to see where you're going, because there's the coral heads right below that you hit one of those going in at a number of knots and you can do some very serious damage to your boat, if not actually sink it. So as captain, there's always a little bit of an anxiety level. You're always worried about the maintenance of your boat and if there's any issues. but nature can throw things at you that come in unexpected ways. And it's part of what makes it thrilling. It's part of what sometimes keeps you up at night and causes concern, but you do your best. But there's no guarantees in life. You could end your life on the 405 in Southern California in the midst of a traffic jam. We take our chances, and I'd rather do so doing something that I truly love and have a passion for.
I agree. Yeah, it's so funny because Sophie and I have an episode coming up. We did another lists with Sophia, and one of the things, two things that you just spoke about. One of them was I mentioned that there's that saying, it's a fine line between courage and stupidity. And, it's courageous if you're a success, and it's stupid if you failed. And I think a lot of people don't want to fail, and so they don't embark on these adventures and these journeys. They have this inherent risk associated with them that you kind of have to accept at the beginning, right? That you are choosing to do something really exciting, and in so doing, it is not exclusive of that risk, that something really awful could happen. Like you said, it could actually be a question of life and death, but you've got to do it. There's risk everywhere. Like you said, the 405 could be your demise, and going down to spearfish for a fish and having a shark come up behind you or something could also be your demise. You just, but you're living. I mean, you're exploring, you're seeing what the world has to offer to you, and you're an active participant in the world at that point. And I don't think that there's anything better than that.
You can get little glimpses of it. We had an interesting experience. It's one that was, very memorable, very striking, and may have even been changing in terms of my philosophy and whatnot. But Julie and I were in the Cayman Islands and doing a lot of diving, as we typically do. And they've got, in order to protect the reefs, they have these mooring balls that you are supposed to encourage to tie up to, so that you don't have to drop the anchor down onto a coral head. And we did so. It's kind of funny. It's people oftentimes will say, yeah, I felt kind of queasy about something. That day we dove, we tied up properly to this very nice looking brand new mooring ball, went over the back. And like I say, I had kind of a little trepidation that day for reasons that I couldn't explain at the time. We did a dive. There was a lot of current. It was kind of murky. It wasn't a terribly pleasant dive. And oftentimes when I go out, I inflate this it's a little float that I'll tie up to the coral head. And it's just a marker to say, this is the area, start looking for the boat, which is overhead at some point. So it's just an indication that you're back to your starting point. And we did our dive. We came back, and I saw that mark, and I look up, and my boat's not there. First light is nowhere to be seen. She's gone.
Oh, no.
And so the two of us from fairly deep waters popped up in our scuba gear, looked around, and by kicking and thrusting my head higher, I saw my boat, my sailboat, well off on the horizon at a fairly significant distance. And we were between two islands in an area of fairly strong currents. There were no boats to be seen. And it was there'd be a question about even swimming back to the land. But I very much wanted to get my boat back, which was basically drifting in the general direction of Cuba, like some 90 miles to the north. And so I took my tank off. I had my snorkel gear, and I started heading off in chase of my boat. And, I thought, well, I'm a strong swimmer. I'll certainly catch up with it. I've got my fins on. But as swimming along, it became very apparent that it was actually gaining on me. It was getting farther and farther away. And I'm making a commitment as I'm swimming along. I'm getting farther and farther away from Julie, who's floating there with gear closer to the island. And I'm getting farther and farther away from land, with the recognition that at some point, I'm just a tiny little bobbing head that even if somebody came in search of me, if I can't find my boat, it wasn't clear that they'd be able to find me in a sea with swells. And it was one of those moments that you go, I've made decisions in life. I've tried to make good decisions and try to do things founded upon knowledge and awareness of possible issues that could arise. But this was just one of those surprise things. And it was the real recognition that day might be my last day. And It had a lot of impact upon me. I thought about it deeply over the next several days, and it was quite an interesting experience. I did realize that my life could end, or it's going to, obviously, but I could accept it. But I was kind of thinking back as I was swimming along, chasing my boat. I was thinking about my life and the situation, and it was a very moving experience, actually, in many ways. The outcome of this is that my boat hit some sort of little eddy, or the wind gust died down. It stalled out, and I gave it one last push. It turned out it had drifted about 1.6 miles by the time I actually climbed aboard the boat again. And there was the mooring ball firmly attached to my boat.
Oh, no.
It was tied up properly to the boat. But although it was new and the line from it was new, some prop must have clipped the line, and it was just hanging on by a thread. Bad on me for not having given it a close inspection before we dove to the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
But it's one of those things that all looked fine, and it could very, very easily have turned something that was anything but, and could have been the end of my life, which was interesting. We put ourselves, we try to minimize danger by being prepared, by having the right equipment, making good decisions, but you never know. Life happens.
Life happens, indeed. What an incredible adventure. I mean, life is an adventure, right? And it's just there for us to recognize it, take advantage of it while we're healthy, while the opportunities are there, like Dawn says. I hope you really enjoyed all of the boat sounds. This was a fun episode to record, and it is only the first of 2 parts. But I used a different recording method for this one. But it's all on a single track, which is why you kind of hear us talking over each other occasionally. Usually I record on 2 tracks and I can fix those kinds of overlaps. But on this one, you're hearing the ship clock, you're hearing bells, the birds, the boat itself rubbing against the dock. So that's a lot of fun. I really wish Don and his partner, Julie Dunne, the best adventure possible. I'm so excited for them. I love hearing about how they prepared, all of the provisions, the planning, everything that goes along with this trip. So be sure to check the show notes. I actually have a link for you to follow this adventure, as well as links to some of the other things that we talked about. Please take a moment to rate this episode, because your ratings really do help move this podcast closer to the top of searches so that my friends and I can reach more people. I'm looking forward to sharing more upcoming In the Company of Friends talks with you. So be sure to follow me on the socials and the .com, all at The Queen Trail Podcast. That's TheQuainTrelle podcast. I am Sil Annan, the Queen Trail, and until next time, I wish you passion, adventure, zest for life, intrepidness, curiosity, elegance, and beauty.